Donald Trump appears to be raising the stakes in the ongoing impeachment inquiry against him. He's openly called on China to investigate his potential 2020 rival, Joe Biden. The U.S. president is accused of privately pressuring Ukraine's leader to dig up dirt on Mr. Biden, who now leads the race for the Democratic presidential nomination. Speaking in Florida, he doubled down on the issue, calling on both Ukraine and Beijing to go after Mr. Biden.
They should investigate the Bidens, because how does a company that's newly formed, and all these companies, if you look at, and by the way, likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine. So I would say that President Zelensky, if it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Bidens, because nobody has any doubt that they weren't crooked. That was a crooked deal, 100%.
Mr. Trump alleges that Mr. Biden, as vice president back in 2014, tried to block a Ukrainian corruption probe into his son Hunter's business partner, using U.S. aid as leverage. But the record in Ukraine shows that there was no such corruption probe.
President Trump has also accused Hunter Biden of using his family connections to raise $1.5 billion in 2013 from China for a new investment vehicle in Beijing. He claims that Hunter Biden made millions off this investment.
Well, China earlier this week denied ever giving large amounts of money to Hunter Biden. Mr. Trump says that he hasn't asked China to open a probe, but that he can certainly ask his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, to do so.
However, China is unlikely to interfere. Asked about President Trump's appeal for an investigation, a Chinese diplomat told CNN that the situation was quite chaotic, adding that China does not want to get in the middle of U.S. politics. Now, for more, Simon Marks joins us from Washington, D.C. Where to start, Simon? What is President Trump trying to achieve by pulling China into the impeachment saga?
Well, I've got bad news for that Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman. China is now front and center in the middle of this story. We have learnt within the last few minutes, Steve, that Ukraine has decided to reopen investigations into Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden. That, of course, comes in spite of the fact that the Ukrainian president at the United Nations, seating alongside President Trump, insisted that he was not feeling any pressure to take action with regard to the Biden's business activities in Ukraine, which have been investigated previously by Ukrainian authorities, who concluded that there was nothing nefarious going on. So Ukraine now caving in to pressure from President Trump that was publicly voiced by the president there yesterday, and that pressure also is on China now, at a time when the United States is locked into a trade war with China. So one of the questions here in Washington is just how far is President Trump going to push this with Chinese officials? How serious is he about the need for China to open an investigation? And let's just remind everyone, Steve, what the president did there yesterday with that call for not just one government now, but two governments to investigate his possible rival in the November 2020 presidential election is clearly illegal. It clearly breaches federal election law, which prohibits the solicitation of support of any value from any foreign national. So huge questions surrounding what President Trump said in the grounds of the White House there yesterday, and huge questions now for both Ukraine and China.
Well, as to the legality or otherwise of his actions, Simon, Mr. Trump doesn't seem to care. He doesn't seem to, in fact, he seems to almost be normalizing his actions in a sense. How have reactions been in Washington to this latest development in regards to this Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, the reaction, Dawn, is precisely that this is a brazen attempt by the President of the United States. The vast majority of sort of veteran observers, particularly from the national security establishment here, view it that way. A brazen attempt by the President of the United States to normalize law-breaking by his administration, and not just by the President personally now, but also by Vice President Pence, who yesterday said that the American people have the right to know if Joe Biden was up to corrupt business practices in Ukraine by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who is revealed in new texts that were published overnight by congressional investigating committees to have been aware of the fact that negotiations with Ukraine were underway to give the president of Ukraine an audience with President Trump at the White House, but only if he would open an investigation into Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. So all of this providing a huge head of steam for Democrats investigating possible impeachment of President Trump, but raising questions for Republicans. Are they going to stand by and continue supporting a president who is engaged in this kind of illegal activity?
Simon, thank you very much for that. We've been speaking there to Simon Marks, reporting to us there from Washington, D.C.